It is the Resistance Report for July 5th, 2017. We're on our summer schedule, which means we are going to be broadcasting this to you live on Wednesdays at this time. You can watch it on this Facebook page almost any time, but if you want to see it live and have the pleasure of actually writing us questions and knowing that we are doing this live, and you are live, and I'm live, and this is a live production, please do join us on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and all times in between. We might also do this if there's late-breaking important news during the week. It's just that summer is summer, and although all of us are working as hard as we can, and I know you are at the Resistance, and we must, and I'll get back to that in a moment, we should also recognize that it's summer and take it a little bit more slowly if we possibly can. This is also available in podcast. I want to remind you, if you would like to hear the Resistance Report on podcast, you can download it from iTunes or any place you get your podcasts. Just go to Resistance Report. And I also want to remind you that the purpose of the Resistance Report is not solely or even primarily to give you news. You can get the news from many sources. It's to give you context. It's to connect the dots. It's to enable you to see the larger picture that is going on. Yesterday, speaking of larger picture, I talked with somebody at a July 4th gathering who was despairing about America, said to me he has never seen this country more polarized, he has never seen such deep division, has never seen the country in this kind of shape before. Now, I told him that we have been through much worse, and I wasn't only referring to the Civil War. I mean, in my memory, for example, I like to think I'm not all that old, but I do remember the year 1968. Some of you may remember 1968. Do you? If you remember it, just nod your heads. All right, many of you do remember 1968. Well, if you remember 1968, you also remember that that was the year and the spring of 1968 was the time when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. It was also a time in June when Robert Kennedy, right after he won the Democratic primary, was assassinated. Our cities, city after city in America, burning, rioting, looting, a lot of anger by a lot of people. And we also, in 1968, faced some of the deepest tragic deaths we have had in this country, as thousands of young people, mostly young men, and also tens of thousands of Vietnamese perished in Vietnam. That war was escalating. And in November of 1968, to top it all off, America elected Richard M. Nixon President of the United States. And Richard Nixon's lying, his cheating, his burglaries, his misuse of power didn't catch up with him for another 5 years. What I mean by all of this is, yes, now is a tough time. Of course it's a tough time. But we have been through as bad, if not worse, in living memory, and we are resilient. We get through it. Our institutions of government, our institutions of civil society do respond. And we did respond. And we got through it then, and we will get through this again. Now, what distinguishes what's going on right now and what's different today from what happened then is that while many Americans disagree on issues, it's not the issues per se that are driving us apart. I mean, we disagree, of course, on global warming and environmental protection. We disagree on injustices and the meaning of injustice. Maybe some of us disagree on what it means to discriminate. Maybe we disagree on immigration. But it's not the issues that are driving us apart as much as it is today something that is different, deeper, potentially more dangerous. Because you see, if you disagree on issues, there's always the possibility of coming together, of compromising in the end, because you basically are viewing the same facts. But if you are viewing different facts, if there is an alternative reality that you are in, if a third of America is in one reality and 2/3 of America are in a very different reality, well, then there's no room for compromise, because you're actually looking at a different world. You're seeing different facts. You don't agree even on the basics. And that, frankly, is what worries me in terms of our democracy right now. It's not just polarization on the issues, it's polarization on reality. It's polarization on what is actually happening. Now, if some Americans are being told, for example, that there is no climate change, and that even if there is some climate change, people are not contributing to it, how can they possibly compromise with Americans who know and, frankly, look at the science and understand that there is obviously climate change and that, in fact, human beings are contributing to that? Or, to take another example, if there are a lot of Americans who feel that and believe and have been told that there has been massive voter fraud in the 2016 election, and I'm not talking about Russian influence, I'm talking about the allegation that 3 to 5 million people have voted fraudulently for Hillary Clinton, and they believe that, even though there's not one shred of evidence. If they believe it, if they're told it over and over again, how can we come together and compromise? And how can we come together around voter ID laws, for example, which are patent efforts at voter suppression built upon a tissue, a web of outright lies? I mean, or to take another example, National Public Radio tweets the Declaration of Independence, and there are thousands of Americans who think it is liberal propaganda. The Declaration of Independence, tweeted because it comes from National Public Radio, is liberal propaganda. Where do we meet? And frankly, although in many, many respects 1968 was worse and the polarization was deeper, and the tragedy was greater, our democracy was resilient because we basically all believed in the same fundamental truths. And that is what basically worries me. It's what keeps me up at night. I mean, Donald Trump's assault on the press is particularly dangerous for democracy, because you've got the President of the United States not only telling the public lies, outright lies, and saying it again and again and again and again, and we know that this technique is not new, but it's new in a democracy. A democracy doesn't function well when its leaders do this. But it's beyond this. On Sunday morning, Trump seemed to promote violence against CNN. He tweeted an old video clip of him performing in a WWE professional wrestling match with a CNN logo superimposed on the head of his opponent. And in this clip, Trump is shown slamming the CNN avatar to the ground and pounding him with punches and elbows to the head. Trump added the hashtags Fraud News CNN and FNN for Fraud News Network. The tweet culminated a really, truly bizarre week of Trump attacks on the media. And you know, we've almost become inured to this. We've almost become to the point where we don't see it, or we are just simply insensitized, non-sensitized to what is going on. But this is serious stuff. The night before this CNN tweet, that is last Saturday night, Trump used a portion of his speech at a Celebrate Freedom rally at Kennedy Center to denounce the press. And he has denounced the press before, obviously, called the press enemies. But listen, this is what he said. The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them. The people know the truth, he said. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not. And then Trump's words drew a standing ovation from the crowd, which waved miniature American flags. The day before, 2 days before, on Thursday, Trump posted a crude tweet blasting the co-hosts of MSNBC's Morning Joe, who had been critical of Donald Trump. He called Mika Brzezinski low IQ crazy Mika, and he called Joe Scarborough Psycho Joe. Joe Scarborough, by the way, had been a Republican congressman in a former life. He said that Brzezinski was bleeding badly from a facelift when he saw them New Year's Eve. The day before, Trump charged that the Amazon Washington Post, sometimes referred to as the Guardian of Amazon, was not paying internet taxes, which they should, is fake news. Now, this tweet didn't even make much coherent sense, but the blast seems to have been provoked by a Washington Post story the previous day revealing that a Time magazine cover featuring Donald Trump on the face of the cover hangs in at least 4 of Trump's golf courses around the world, but that the cover is a fake. Now, what exactly is going on here? Again, what we try to do is pull these stories together to show a pattern, to give you context. Now, maybe Trump's attacks on the press last week, culminating Sunday, were his way of distracting public attention from what was a terrible week for Donald Trump in terms of a week of embarrassing news. The Congressional Budget Office finding that 22 million Americans would lose their health care if Trump care went into effect, and then the Senate not even being able to vote, there not being enough votes, Mitch McConnell to get a majority for anything. The refusal of election officials in many states, it's now 44 states, have refused to cooperate with Trump's trumped-up commission on voter fraud. And also there was news, you may remember, that the Trump financier Peter Smith, last fall, this is really amazing, he last fall assembled a team of computer experts to contact hackers connected with the Russian government. And Peter Smith, when questioned about this, he said he was working with Trump campaign advisor Michael Flynn. All of this news last week. Now, if Trump's goal by attacking the press last week was to deflect public attention from these very damaging, embarrassing stories, it worked, because a lot of these stories were pushed off the front pages. They were pushed out of cable news. They were such inflammatory tweets that they took up a lot of airtime last week. But there's another possibility, and that possibility is that Trump is truly losing it. That is, and I'm quoting here from Scarborough and Brzezinski, and their conclusion is that, quote, President Trump is not well. Nice way of saying he's literally losing it. Maybe the strain of being a thin-skinned narcissist under the continuous glare of the press and the critical glare of the press is finally tipping him over the edge. I don't know. But it's also possible to look at this attack on the press, this escalation of his attack on the press, in a different and more, I think, in many ways, a kind of more menacing reality. I mean, yes, he has already attacked the press for months and months as the enemy of the people and fake news. We all know all of this. But as the tweets and the rallies and the attacks have become shriller and more personal, and more provocative. Their clear message seems to be that the critics of Trump in the media are bad people, that they're conspiring to undo his presidency. The people whom Trump supporters must not let silence him, who deserve to be slammed the way Trump took it out on CNN in that mock video he posted Sunday morning. It's a narrative, this narrative that somehow Trump supporters have got to be on guard, be vigilant against a media that is conspiring against Trump. The Trump supporters have got to be more than vigilant. They've got to, in some way, attack the media. This is showing up increasingly on right-wing websites. Now, I want to play for you a recent video from the National Rifle Association. It runs about a minute. I just ask you to be patient because it's very well worth and important in terms of this discussion to watch it and see what is going out there. Have a look.
They use their media to assassinate real news. They use their schools to teach children that their president is another Hitler. They use their movie stars and singers and comedy shows and award shows to repeat their narrative over and over again. And then they use their ex-president to endorse the resistance, all to make them march, make them protest, make them scream racism and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia, to smash windows, burn cars, shut down interstates and airports, bully and terrorize the law-abiding, until the only option left is for the police to do their jobs and stop the madness. And when that happens, they'll use it as an excuse for their outrage. The only way we stop this, the only way we save our country and our freedom, is to fight this violence of lies with the clenched fist of truth. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
I mean, what has happened? The National Rifle Association used to be, protective of gun owners and a lobby group to just advance the interests of gun owners. When did they become this provocative? I mean, it's almost as if they're talking about provoking a civil war of some sort. I mean, this clenched fist theme, and this clenched fist theme is being legitimized by the President of the United States, who's on a warpath against news organizations and professionals who criticize him. I don't know about you. I find this deeply, deeply troubling. I mean, will news organizations be intimidated by this? I don't think so, at least at this point. But it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery path we are on. Trump's increasingly incendiary tweets and messages that are encouraging other groups and other similar messages, like the National Rifle Association, which is transmogrifying itself into something that is quite frightening, constitutes an overt assault on freedom of the press, which is the cornerstone of our democracy. Now again, to put this in context, to connect the dots, let me just say that Trump's attacks on science are equally dangerous because they also are preventing and are designed to prevent the American public from knowing the truth so that they will believe his lies. I mean, at Trump's Environmental Protection Agency, for example, you've got Scott Pruitt and his team of climate change deniers. And what are they doing? They're firing. Scott Pruitt has already fired dozens of scientists. In May, he fired half of the members of his scientific advisory board, intended to, and that board is intended to interpret research and provide expert recommendations for the agency. He plans to fill the board with agency oil company insiders. He's appointed oil lobbyists and climate change deniers to key positions including former lawyers for Koch Industries, the past president of the Ohio Coal Association, former assistants of climate change denier Senator Jim Inhofe. He's removed the climate change webpage the EPA used to have, which was a public service, providing important information about what was actually occurring. And he's planning a government-wide review of climate science, and his plan is to bring in a group of climate change deniers to challenge the scientific consensus that's accepted by all federal agencies, including the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. I mean, you might as well bring in people into government to contest whether the Earth is actually rotating, moving around the sun. You might as well bring in people, scientists to contest whether in fact the Earth is flat. I mean, what is going on here? We are witnessing an unprecedented attempt to mislead the American people. Now, whether you agree or disagree with Donald Trump's policies, all of us must stand up to this demagoguery. It is dangerous to our democracy. So I guess the bottom line is we are resilient. We can get through this. In 1968, in many ways, it was worse. But there is a fundamental threat here that is profoundly different. And if carried on to its logical next step and logical conclusions, is much more toxic than anything we have faced in living memory. And now, on to your questions. Kim Avery Lyman, what recourse do I have if my state has decided to share my confidential voter data to the phony Trump Voter Commission? Kim, you don't have much recourse, but here's what I would advise you to do. And don't even wait till your state has said yes. If there's any danger of your state cooperating, then you've got to organize. Organize with your friends and organize with your communities. Organize on indivisibleguide.com. Organize against those legislators that want to give away your private information. And eventually, I think there ought to be lawsuits about this. I think that people ought to, there's a private right to litigate. I mean, we're talking about First Amendment here. This is a threat to your First Amendment rights. So I would do both. I would organize and mobilize against legislators that are willing to do this, and your state Secretary of State is, if your state Secretary of State is willing to cooperate, organize and mobilize. But I'd also sue. A class lawsuit. Go to some attorneys. Christine Durham, how do we elect progressive candidates? We need to form explicit plans about what progressives can do to help voters and citizens. How do we start this process or help it along? Well, Christine, we've got to, you have got to, all of us have got to move quickly, because the Democratic National Committee is already coming up with primary candidates, Democrats, to take on Republicans in red districts or purple districts. And it's important that those candidates are principled, that they actually care about changing the political dynamics of this country, changing the power structure. The power structure, I mean, one of the reasons Donald Trump got elected, we all understand this. It's not just racism and misogyny and xenophobia. We've had racism, misogyny, and xenophobia in this country since the founding of the Republic. But Donald Trump made headway because he linked all of this hate to economic grievances. So many Americans that are heading downward on a downward escalator. So if we don't deal with this fundamental, if the Democratic Party does not come up with an affirmative, inspiring, important message, but not just a message, a set of ideas to reverse widening inequality, to put people on an upward escalator. We're going to have more Donald Trumps later on. So you have an opportunity and a responsibility right now to make sure there are progressive candidates. And you can do it. You can make sure. Just check in with your Democratic Party and find out what they're doing. Or if you don't like the person, you find somebody, or you yourself run. Jenny Neild, should Trump's tweets be ignored or given less airtime? This is the last question. Jenny, yes, they should be ignored. But the problem is they are not being ignored. The press is reporting them, and I think, and what the press is saying as a justification for reporting them is that this is newsworthy because it's a window into the mind of the President of the United States. It's what the President of the United States actually believes or thinks. Now, the response, and I have said this again and again, and I have said it publicly, and I've said it to people who are professionals in the media, by repeating the president's tweets, you are making them newsworthy. I mean, if you've got a president who actually doesn't know his own mind, who is a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, unhinged, then by simply repeating his tweets, whatever he wants to tweet, whenever he wants to tweet them, then you are legitimizing and giving far more credence to his ramblings. I mean, his sort of unhinged, paranoid fantasies. Okay, this is really the last question. Ray Alt. Why does the resistance focus on Trump and not the entire bipartisan swamp? Well, Ray, it certainly should. And if you've been following this particular page, you know that we certainly are bipartisan in our criticisms of swamp-like behavior in the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party. And by the way, my message to Democrats as well as Republicans is there are more independent voters than there are Republicans or Democrats. And the largest party of all is the party of non-voters. I mean, if you really want to win, you've got to mobilize not just your own party, but the independents and also the party of non-voters. And the way you do that is you clean up the swamp and you give people a vision of where this country needs to go. A vision that is about fighting corruption, fighting big money in politics. A vision that is about actually getting our democracy back, making it work for everybody. Now, I promised you last week that I would give you a summer reading list. Are you ready for the summer reading list? I don't want to keep you unduly, but these are the books I'm reading. And I don't know about you, but I tend to read, a bunch of books at the same time. I know it's a little odd, but I just like to have a bunch of books, and I pick them up, and I read some, and then I go somewhere else. Now, here's what I'm reading. One book that I'm enjoying a great deal is David K. Johnston's The Making of Donald Trump. It is, I'll tell you, it is not your lighthearted summer reading. It's not easygoing in terms of getting away from the news, but it is a useful book to have. A book that is much lighter reading actually is a book I've been enjoying a great deal. I didn't bring it in, so you're just going to have to hear me spout about it. It's a book by Paul Beatty called The Sellout. I think it is not only dark humor, but it is really riveting. Paul Beatty, The Sellout. Here's another one. This is when you have time and space for a little historical reading. This is a book by Clement Fantovich. Now, you're not going to find this in the bookstore. Maybe you will. I want you to patronize your local bookstore if you possibly can. It's called America's Founding and the Struggle Over Economic Inequality. Can you see it? America's Founding and the Struggle Over Economic Inequality. I mean, it's good and important historical background reading for what we're now going through. The Founding Fathers understood how important it was to overcome inequality, that we needed a large and growing middle class for our democracy. And although the Founding Fathers had some real blinders, when it came to African Americans and women. We know that, obviously. But some of the Founding Fathers did not. But most of them understood that there had to be a large and growing middle class. And this book is an important clue to all of that. One more suggestion for you, and this is just a fascinating book. I don't have it here, but I'm going to say it to you. It's by a fellow named Cy Montgomery. And it's called The Soul of an Octopus. You know, if you are at all interested, in fact, I wasn't even, I mean, why be interested in an octopus? I've never personally been terribly interested in octopuses or octopi. But this is a absolutely fascinating, interesting, enjoyable, thought-provoking piece of work. One more. This is really the last one. I have been reading this, and I have been hard-pressed to put it down. It's a book by Jonathan Allen and Annie Partis. It's called Shattered. Shattered. S-H-A-T-T-E-R-E-D. The subtitle is Inside Hillary Clinton's Campaign. And it is a shattering book. Inside Hillary Clinton's doomed campaign. I'm sorry, I knew that there was another word there. Shattered by Jonathan Allen and Annie Partis. Shattered Inside Hillary Clinton's doomed campaign. So that's what's on my reading list this summer, what I'm trying to get to. If I can just say one final word. In some ways, this is a harder period of time for many of you and many of us than the first 4 or 5 months of Donald Trump, because people are away. Some people are on vacation. People sort of are trying to grapple with the fact that Trump is not going away immediately or anytime soon. And you don't have necessarily the meetings or the numbers or the people or the demonstrations or the marches or the ways in which you can feel or we can feel that there really is hope. I just want to say to you again that not only is there hope, but I am completely confident that we will prevail, in the sense that the attacks on our basic values, on our basic institutions, on the courts, on the press, on our democracy, cannot and will not continue. I can't tell you exactly how Donald Trump's reign will end. I hope it is and expect it will be legally and peacefully. It must be. But this will not go on forever. And we are resilient enough to make sure that there are safeguards in place so that it doesn't happen again. And on that note, I want to wish you a great week. I'll be back next Wednesday. I want to thank Sasha Lightman and Andrew Santana for their enormous help putting this together. And I'll see you next week.